and gentlemen, my name is Jana Puglierin. I'm a Berlin-based think tanker with the European Council on Foreign Relations. I'm your moderator for this session, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you. Our session is titled Locking Arms, Strengthening Defense Industrial Cooperation, and I'm very happy that I have an excellent panel and also quite diverse perspectives. I will shortly introduce my panel, and then we go right into the questions. It is, as always, with the MSc, we have a kind of discussion amongst ourselves, and then I open it up for your questions. So prepare yourself already. I want to bring as many of you in as possible. So to my very right, we have Richard Marles. He's the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence of Australia. To his right, we have David McGuinty. He's the Minister of National Defence of Canada. Followed by Hélène Conway-Mouret. She's the Vice Chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Armed Forces in the French Parliament. And next to Hélène, we have Christopher Coons, who many Germans might know. He's a senator. He's a member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations of the United States of America. And the little German story is that he resembles very much our former chancellor. And there were kind of several pictures taken with both of them. And it was a thing in Germany for a while. So. And then we have René Obermann. He's the chairman of the board of directors at Airbus and the chairman of Warburg Pincus Europe. So we have a perspective from the industry as well. So first, warm-up round. Consider this a speed dating exercise. So you have a speed date with me, and I want you to position yourself. So we had in Germany headlines like FCAS is never going to work. Now maybe the program is kind of collapsing altogether. There were also some not so positive news or some insecurity about the future of AUKUS. So we have, at the one hand, the need for more defense industrial cooperation. We have identified this for a long while now in Europe, but also in NATO and more broadly, that we need to break up the silos, and then we have so often kind of reports that are negative, that kind of tell us stories about failed cooperation. So where are we in your perspective? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Have we heard the message and learned the lesson, and is there something to be looking for?
Well, I think from an Australian point of view, I think the answer to that is definitely. I mean, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, the first thing to say is we've got to do defence industry cooperation. As we are all spending more money on defence, if we don't grow the pie through greater defence industry, then all we're going to do is spend more money on the same amount of capability, which is just an act of insanity. So we've got to do better in terms of defence industry production, and that is only going to happen with cooperation. And that means really aggressively breaking down barriers, doing co-production, doing co-innovation. I would say, Australian defence industry is fundamentally an exercise in cooperation. You can go right back to what we've done with Thales, a French company, in building Bushmasters, which we've provided to Ukraine. You mentioned AUKUS. Often AUKUS is seen in the context of a choice around who we will be working with to procure a submarine. But what's less understood is that between the US, between Australia and the UK, we have now broken down barriers around defence industry. We've created a seamless defence industrial environment, and that's not only helping us build submarines, it's helping us do defence industry production across the board. So, I mean, it's more than light at the end of the tunnel. We're actually in the light, and it would, in this day, literally define Australian defence industry.
Mm-hmm. So,
same question.
Yes, same question.
Well,
just short positioning, where do you see Canada standing?
Canada is moving quickly. We are launching the single largest, greatest reinvestment in our Canadian Armed Forces in probably 60 to 70 years. We're launching very shortly a new defense industrial strategy for the country. We've worked with about 2,000 companies to arrive there. We've taken a look at 17 countries comparatively to see what worked, what didn't work, what did they learn. We understand that partnership is going to be critical going forward. We're very, very hopeful in terms of laying out 10 new sovereign capabilities. What can we what can we build? And if we can't build it, where are we going to partner? With whom would we partner? And if we can't do that, where are we going to buy it? What kind of partners, what kind of like-minded countries do we want to buy from? So we're looking at a complete rebuild of the Canadian Armed Forces, top to bottom, from the bases up. And we're procuring, frankly, hundreds of billions of dollars of equipment. We're rebuilding 33 bases on the ground. We've brought in the single largest pay increase for our soldiers in about 40 years. So we are investing heavily, and we're very, very open to cooperating as we are with others. That's why we're so pleased to be able to ratify the SAFE agreement. We're the only non-European nation to be allowed into the club, so to speak. And we're looking forward to ratifying that and working with our partner nations and the European Union as a whole. So I think it's very promising. I think we're going to have to work at it. I often think of cooperation in the defense sector the way we cooperated during the pandemic. I don't think we could have achieved the mRNA success that we achieved with our vaccines if we had not pooled our resources, pooled our research, pooled our know-how to the benefit of humanity. So I think we can do this. We can do it in a way that is productive for our own needs and also good for our economies, good for our people.
Hélène, a European perspective now. I mentioned FCAS already, but I don't want to torture you with it.
AUKUS as well before, so I mean, I'm very unlucky.
No, but I mean, we in Europe, I think, are particularly challenged. We talk really about defense industrial cooperation, getting things done better, building the European technological and defense industrial base. So where do you see us? Do you think there is kind of some progress?
Well, it's just a little bit more difficult for us Europeans. I mean, you know, here we have representatives from 3 big countries that have the one language and one history. We have a geography, we have a history which is different among all these countries that have come together on a very unique project for the European Union, which is that without force, countries willingly and freely want to come together and build something, build a project, build a future. So we are, it's a process in the making. And at the same time, we're under the same pressure as our friends, that is to invest, which we haven't done for 70 years. And we have, in that time, produced for some of us. Not every European country has a defense base. But some countries have chosen to have one, and France is one of them. And we have to come together in a fragmented and project which is still, you know, very small, where we have the pressure from outside, being invited very strongly by our American ally to do more, to defend ourselves, to spend rapidly, but to spend within Europe, which is something that we have to change. As Europeans have always been in competition with one another. We sell outside of Europe and we purchase outside of Europe. So we need to turn that around and start looking a bit inward, trying to have a market which is not having a competition with one another, and build something European, and also deal with our partners and see what we buy off the shelves from them that we do not produce, because we do have that problem of the economy of scale. If we produce individually, which is still the case, we still have national industries. We haven't come to the European level yet, and if we did, we may be able to compete indeed, you know, on the world level. But at the moment, we're just individual countries trying to do our best to grow individually and then to come together. And then indeed, there is the FCAS, which is one example. But as we were discussing it before, I think the project was twisted from the start. There was a huge, very strong political will that France and Germany were going to have a project together. And yet, if it had come from a bottom-up perspective, asking the industrial groups how they wanted to work together and what they wanted to do, we may not be where we are now today. But so the will was there, but it's not just sufficient.
Still, it's quite telling if kind of two major countries have a lot of political will, want something to work, and then it doesn't. Chris, over to you. Hélène already mentioned kind of that there is a need also for the Europeans to maybe buy more European or focus more on kind of making European defense industry stronger. This morning, we had an on-the-record conversation at the Rosewood Hotel with Albert Kobe, and he actually was quite acknowledging the fact that the Europeans cannot only buy American, but need to buy also in Europe and need to expand also the kind of European defense industry, so more cooperation within Europe. How do you see this now in the United States? Coming back to where are we? So what is the discussion when you think about defense industrial cooperation? Maybe not limit it to Europe, also kind of the Indo-Pacific, but how is the US thinking on this right now?
Thank you.
Or how is your thinking? You cannot speak for the administration.
So I'm the senior Democrat on defense appropriations, which is why I'm relevant to this conversation. Look, essentially, the challenge for decades has been resources and alignment. The United States has spent more than any of our core allies on defense, but during the Cold War, we also invested, we had a very Buy America attitude, and we erected a whole deal of barriers to genuine partnership and cooperation, whether with Canadians, Australians, French, German, wherever. And so, three things. As Richard said, resources are not the problem today. Our core partners and allies have genuinely stepped forward and addressed what has been a long-standing concern by many Americans about burden sharing. Thank you. That should have secured clarity from the Americans and our administration that we are now moving towards alignment. And alignment means the United States reducing some of the barriers towards genuine partnership. The missile control technology, the ITARs that have been bedeviling the early stages of AUKUS, the CFIUS restrictions that make it harder for European companies, for example, to purchase growing and promising American companies and vice versa. We must treat our allies as allies. You are not our dependents. You are our partners. We rely on you. We need you. I see China, Iran, the DPRK, and Russia more and more closely aligning. And frankly, what is motivating this increase in investment, which is Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and the very real threats of both North Korean, Iranian, and Chinese aggression, what all of that should be producing is not just greater investment, but greater alignment. And that alignment needs to produce co-production in Australia of some of our most sophisticated long-range fires and interceptors and cutting-edge technology, co-production with Canada, co-production with France, co-production with European. Look, if you look at the F-35, it is a positive example. All of us represent our own countries. I have to get elected in the United States, and so it is good to be able to bring home some jobs and some investment in my region. But we have to look beyond Buy America. We have to look beyond just Buy European. We have to not harm our relations by cutting off one partnership to pursue another. Bluntly, the PRC has the industrial capacity, the energy, the data, the scale to win the race for AI, for crypto, for cyber, and for space, unless we partner and coordinate. We will wake up a decade from now and wish that we had been better aligned if China genuinely wins the race to dominate AI.
And may I tempt you to tell us whether you see the current Trump administration implementing what you just laid out?
I do not, and that is a core concern. The reason I led a group of 12 members of the House and Senate to Denmark 2 weeks ago was to say, this is insanity. Threatening a NATO ally with force, threatening core NATO allies with tariffs to extract a pointless territorial concession was very much outside our core commitments. Bluntly, for Bridge Colby to come and give a speech in Brussels and never mention Russia, to give a speech in Seoul and never mention China, must suggest a profound failure to grasp our current environment. There are strong bipartisan feelings and actions in the United States Senate to support NATO, to support Ukraine, to support this collaboration. Senator McConnell and I are not close friends politically, but we are completely aligned on the investment in Ukraine, on the investment in co-production, in the investment in long-range production. America's defense industrial base has long been overly constrained, has not been innovative and productive. We have work to do, but our core attitude must be, we only get through this with our allies. You are not charity cases. You are not dependent on us. We need you every bit as much, if not more, than you need us. And to the extent Americans live that and act on those core values, we can get through this well together. To the extent we cause needless tension, confusion, and a lack of reliability, we are simply opening the door to chaos.
Thank you. Hear, hear. René, from the perspective of the industry, when you look at attempts for industry to work more closely together and to collaborate and to cooperate, do you see this working better than in the past because it's easier?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say if that was the voice of the United States of America, I think we would all be in a much better position now to get our acts together and really do what it takes to be able to deter the aggressors of this world, i.e. Russia, in a very effective way. And so thank you for your clear position. To what you said, Hélène, I couldn't agree with you more, but Airbus is the DNA basically, or the incarnation of collaboration.
But then they say you could never build Airbus today.
Let me just, yeah, well, it still is very much alive. It's the world leader in civil aircraft, and we are not intending to give that up, that position. And it also produces great military products, which could even outperform US equivalents like the KC-46. Our MRTT is much better. So we would love to be able to sell to the United States as well. And at some point in time, hopefully we will be. When it comes to collaboration, the old form of collaboration was to create joint ventures, i.e. MBDA, and that's still very much alive. Or the Ariane program with the Ariane 6 program now working in good shape. Good. The new form of collaboration has to be much more agile. We need to change the way we work, particularly with young tech companies and with the MODs. We have to stop giving very complex specifications and then get paid for years and years for developing something and then come back and look under the hood, it's actually not what we need today. We have to move toward a more agile form of collaboration, having small teams of MODs, experts from business and industry, young companies, and so on. So I think therein lies a big chance. If you allow me one more point. We are all in violent agreement that we need to step up, need to do everything it takes to be able to deter. Our taxpayers pay a huge price because ultimately we have to reprioritize the budgets. For them not to get disappointed, if not frustrated with us, we in Europe have to change because we have 155 different weapon systems or so versus a fifth of that in the US, and we waste a lot of money by not being able to standardize them. We have to change now because otherwise over time we'll lose the support of the taxpayers, hence the voters, and then the political decision makers can't do a thing. And that is us, industry, us political decision makers, we have to work together on this. That's super important.
Can I follow up with another question? And I'm particularly interested in the perspective of the industry. So there were recent initiatives by both EU and NATO to increase joint procurement, to make it more attractive. Do you think they work? Are they attractive to you?
What does that mean?
No,
if we get bigger volumes, yes, of course.
Yeah, for everything that the EU now tries to boost production, to encourage states to invest, to boost industry,
okay,
something
so very clearly, what have we learned from Ukraine? We cannot start building capacity and mass if and when a conflict breaks out. We have to be ready to ramp up instantaneously. In order for being able to do that, we have to focus on the right technologies and products, clear, but we have to build capacity. And we need to change the methodology in getting capacity contracts for industry, not just for Airbus, for all the smaller companies who are in need of that. So in order to be able to ramp up quickly, we need to change the methodology. And we need to build capacity contracts for those industrial players.
Hélène, I have a very German question to you as a French. Is your emphasis on buying European not sometimes exaggerated? Because France is always the country that insists that when we talk about these EU initiatives, EU money, it only can only go to EU countries and EU companies. Is that exaggerated, or do you think that is justified? I just hold you hostage for your country, sorry.
I think it's both. We are, as I said, encouraged to be autonomous, to not having to turn to the Americans anytime we have a problem, and that we are expected also to be a credible and reliable ally in a coalition. And indeed, we have been involved many times together outside of Europe. You see, the French position is quite unique insofar as in 1960, General de Gaulle decided that France was going to be autonomous, having decided to invest in nuclear deterrence and not having US military personnel on French soil. That was not the case for most European countries. So when we're talking about strategic autonomy, we're not talking today about having a divorce with the Americans. We're talking about being able to make our own decisions, defend our own interests, which may not be the same as the US, and also not being totally dependent on another country. And what we see today, and Canada I think is a very good example, is to try to diversify the relationships that we have when we have understood that for a long time we created top-range quality technology in very small quantity because we were at peace and we were just selling outside what we were producing. And indeed today what we have to do, and maybe it's more difficult for us to do it, is to produce mass to be able to sell and meet the needs that we have in a conventional war, which is the one which is being fought in Ukraine. So we need to change, and I think Germany is moving much faster than France, having to diverse from, you know, the car industry, if you like, kind of, you know, with the defense industry somehow shifting towards the car industry, which is, you know, a bit weaker today than it was in the past, when we are not really able to do that as quickly, because we have that drastic shift, if you like, to make. And so by buying Europeans, we want to try to say, yes, we're looking at Europe as a continent, not the EU. When you're talking about buying Europeans, we do not have a European Act. There is an American Buy American Act. We don't. We have the principle of buying European. But I think what René said is absolutely essential, and it's the politician now that's going to be speaking. We need our public opinions to continue supporting the massive efforts that we're making financially. We are, you know, well, especially in France, you know, we can have social unrest quite quickly. We need to convince our populations that it is absolutely essential to invest in defense and spend less in education, in social issues and whatever that matter, because it is the people's daily lives.
And to create European jobs.
Yes. So I think there's one document that we should all read, and it's the British National Strategic Document. And it states very clearly that investing in defense is the creation of jobs, it is investing in innovation and research, and it is basically boosting the economy. So if we have that take, then, you know, we can win the public opinion.
I don't want to be rude, I'm just I'm conscious of the time, and I want to get kind of the audience in, so I really encourage you also to be kind of crisp, but I want to turn to you, Richard, before I open, because Hélène mentioned new partnerships, and maybe I turn to you both. Looking from an EU perspective, is there more potential for cooperation? I mean, Australia is a country where I think where kind of there is a lot of like-mindedness, but maybe not enough de facto cooperation. So do you see the potential for more in this regard?
Yeah, look, I definitely do. And I think one of the things I would say is the French investment in its own defence industry is a huge achievement. And we should acknowledge that. And there's a history behind that, and it represents actually, I mean, a great asset for France, but a great asset for all of us. And I'm very mindful that, you know, I come to this conversation from Australia where we have nothing like the defence industrial base that France has. But I do think that one of the situations that we're in now is that given the circumstances of the world today, we really need to start seeing defence industry as a team sport. And as we are increasing all of our spends, and with that increasing defence industry, countries which have defence industry where there are jobs are only going to benefit. Like they are positioned really well to do that. So I think breaking down barriers, making it much more a collaborative effort is not going to destroy jobs because we are all spending more in this space. In answer to your question, we are working more with Kongsberg, for example, which has, in terms of building joint strike missile, naval strike missile in Australia, but it's very much a Kongsberg investment in Australia. It's actually transformed our relationship with Norway. It's a really good example of where we are doing something with a European country, which will see us manufacturing via kind of European DNA, if I could put it that way, in Australia, but selling back into Europe. Thales Bushmaster, as I mentioned earlier, is a good example. We are working with Rheinmetall in Germany, a German company, building boxes in Australia, again selling back to Germany. So we are doing more with European countries, and as we see it, growing our industrial base and complementing it with both North America and Europe in terms of growing our collective production is playing as part of the team, and you know, very much benefits the capability of all of us.
Last question before I open it up. David, do you see, given the transatlantic hiccups of kind of recent 12 months, do you see Canada moving closer to the EU? Now, you mentioned SAFE already, also when it comes to defense industrial cooperation.
We're there. We just put $529 million in the European Space Agency. We're pursuing a number of joint projects. We are stockpiling some of the world's largest supplies of critical minerals to compete with the Chinese reality that the Chinese authorities are scooping up as much of it as they can. So Canada has a lot of important critical minerals like gallium, like germanium, that are hard to find. And most recently, we've announced our support for the Defense Security Resilience Bank, the new DSRB that we're giving rise to with 14 countries now that we're shopping around the world, so we can create the kind of capital intensity that we need to be able to invest in all of our countries, a kind of a world bank for defense and other dual-use investments. So we're very confident that the world wants to connect, that Canada will continue to diversify, work with the European Union, work with other nations in the Indo-Pacific as we expand our reach. And it's a good time. It's an important time. It's a hopeful time for us to be able to cooperate on these fronts. And we have an awful lot of talent on this stage, an awful lot of talent in this audience. And it's time. It's time for us to come together, and I think we're doing that.
Thank you. I open it up, but I give the floor first to a Munich young leader. There is this fabulous tradition that the MSc and the Körber Foundation have this program for young leaders, and one of those leaders is amongst us. It's Jorit Möller, and she works in the German MOD. She's the personal assistant to State Secretary for Armament and Innovation. And I give you the floor for the first intervention.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question alludes a little bit to one of your questions a little earlier. In strengthening industrial defense cooperation, how would you say should risks be shared among industry and governments? Should states take on more risks in order to incentivize capacity expansion, or would that undermine the market discipline?
Thank you very much. I still collect questions, I think, before we give it back to the panel. There is a lady in the third row, and two gentlemen over there, and then it's the first intervention, and then I do a second round, I promise. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Latika Burke from Australia. A question to any minister that wants to take this or any representative. How do you overcome political volatility in the system in dealing and delivering long-term arms rearmament? And I don't mean necessarily the relationship between the politics and the people, but the relationship that we're seeing in the swings in politics in nearly all our jurisdictions now.
And there were two questions over there by two gentlemen.
Just a quick one. As most of you know, Anduril has pushed forward on designing to manufacturing. So, René, to your point of having sufficient capacity available, not creating it on a new basis, but rather using what's available. There seems to be some overcapacity in some industries in Europe. What's the latest and greatest, and how can we best support that going forward?
And I'm sorry, did you introduce yourself, or did I miss it?
Max Wiesmann,
Okay, sorry.
a Munich resident with a twinkle in the eye.
Okay. And one last question over there.
My name's... I'll just speak up. Oh, no. My name's David. I'm here on behalf of the British press. I wanted to talk a little bit about the speed of defence adoption and the discussion that we had earlier about the problem that Europe moves too slowly and procurement timelines are really long. A place that we can learn a hell of a lot from is Ukraine, where the speed of innovation and the iteration of new technology and then the application very quickly on the battlefield is very fast. But it seems that the problem is that Europe's kind of defense industrial base, while having a lot of depth, isn't really integrating with Ukraine to help scale up the production and the application of those technologies into Europe. So we'd just like to ask the panel how you think that problem can be solved, what we can learn from Ukraine, and how we can better kind of remove regulatory barriers to work closely with Ukraine to help Europe make the right kind of technology and apply it quickly. Thank you.
Any volunteers, René? But you need to answer the question on the risk, because you're only a representative for the industry, and we want to have your perspective on this.
I was actually very keen to answer that question on the risk, because I think industry needs to take more risk with better return perspectives, and also the government needs to take more risk. So the answer is both. And the simple reason for saying that is twofold. One, the old model where you would specify in detail what a weapon system also should look like, and then pay for the development that creates laggards, and it doesn't create entrepreneurial innovation. It doesn't create any pressure in the system. It creates complacency. Number one, I think you should, if possible, you should rather say what you define the military problem statement, and let then innovative and creative players come up with, demonstration or ideas, and then take it the next step. I think that could be a more agile methodology. If the state takes a more active role in giving orders of these humongous budgets, and again, I'm afraid there's too much money in the system because it creates the wrong behavior. Because the state does more of the same, and the KPI is we have spent all the money, we're on a good path. I would rather look at it from the other way and say, what have we gotten? If the state takes more risk and provides young companies such as RFA, ESA Aerospace and others with, some more courageous orders, that helps those companies to then refinance themselves, and it creates a virtuous circle. So, and then the outcome is unclear. You don't know whether it's successful or not. So I think we both have to adopt, and we have to take more risk.
Too much money in the system is quite something coming from the defense industry.
Yeah, but you know what? I started a business when I was a kid at university, long ago. And the only reason why we survived was because we had to be scrappy, and we had to start it, we bootstrap it. There was no many billion VC money. And it was very, very good for us because we eventually turned it into a profitable operation.
Interesting.
It creates a better behavior if you need to, be scrappy.
Interesting. So on the risk, a state perspective, you, Richard, wanted to volunteer?
Yeah, so I think we do need to take on more risk, and I completely actually agree with that contribution. I think that to be more agile and to encourage smaller companies, which we need to, we are going to have to rethink the way in which we procure, which is going to have an acceptance of greater risk. And that's hard for politicians because it's easy for that to roll off the tongue. You then imagine yourself doing the press conference where the risk goes bad, and you've just describing a whole lot of money that has people are accusing you of wasting. That's a bad day to have that press conference. But actually, we need to be able to kind of get past that, because unless we do something in respect of risk, we are just not going to innovate at the pace that we need to innovate. I wanted to answer Latika's question about what do we do with I think political volatility was the phrase.
Yeah.
Look, I actually do think AUKUS is a model here. AUKUS is now at a point where we have seen a change of government in each three countries, the US, the UK and Australia, and yet AUKUS continues. And it says something about the enduring nature of it, and really, obviously what underpins that is bipartisanship, which again rolls off the tongue easily, but a lot of work needs to be done to achieve that. But I would look at the parliaments in each three countries, the Congress obviously in the United States, the work like somebody that Chris has done. There is working at depth, creating that ballast, making sure that there are lots of people who are across it and invested in it, in civil society, in industry, so that you create a momentum behind it, and that it's being argued from the point of view of each country's national interest. So that's it's not owned by a particular party, but it's owned by the national interests of each of the countries. That's at the heart of it. But you do the work, and you can get there. And there's a lot of naysayers in relation to AUKUS, but ultimately I am actually really confident that it will endure across the decades that it will need to in order to deliver what I'm sure it's going to deliver.
Just going back to the question of procurement, one of the things we learned surveying 17 countries before we launched our own strategy, the procurement really had to be reformed, professionalized, made efficient, and in so doing it minimizes risk. It minimizes risk for shareholders and it minimizes risk for your citizenry. So what we've done is created a completely independent, professionalized outfit that buys the goods. We provide our needs, they buy the goods. They perform the negotiations, etc. Now, on the question of public perception, in Canada, people have finally, I think, woken up to one fundamental fact. Our geography will no longer protect us. And I think that speaks for everyone everywhere. I think the second thing we need to remind our Canadian citizens, and we do, is the threat landscape has changed. They're perfectly capable of understanding this. We need to bring them along so they understand. And they do see it. And thirdly, I think they understand that there are strong economic opportunities for them and their families. So we are we're moving forward, proceeding on those three fronts. It seems to be holding. We had an election which largely dealt with this question. And as Prime Minister Carney put it at Davos just a week or two ago, middle powers like ours have got to come together, got to cooperate, have to share. We can do this. We're perfectly capable. The depth of research, engineering, AI, quantum, cryptography in countries represented in this Munich conference is unbelievable. What we need to do is come together and mobilize it and deploy it.
So we have the Ukraine question still unanswered. What can we learn and how can we adapt, how can we innovate more quickly? What can we learn from Ukraine? But Hélène, maybe you want also one word or the other on political volatility, because there are many people in Europe now watching anxiously the upcoming election in France in 2027, and maybe kind of the bipartisanship that was mentioned. Do you see this also kind of potentially with France in the future?
Well, I hope not. And I think we really need to fight disinformation and propaganda coming from other countries, because it is playing an enormous role. And we cannot discard it. But the question on Ukraine, yes, we're learning both from the use of conventional, traditional military equipment, and we're in the 21st century war as well, with the use of technology, intelligence, and having to put all of that together. It's kind of a war of the 20th century and the 21st century fought at one time. And the lessons we're drawing is being put into the type of equipment that we feel we should be building, and the speed at which indeed we need to build it. And I know that a lot of French companies are doing things they haven't done before, that they were actually working with the military. The equipment is being tested, not in real war at the moment or battlefield, but it is being tested, and then it goes back to the industry, and it's then adapted to have it to the optimum. So that was never done before, and it's really what's being done in Ukraine with the use of drones, for instance. But we can feel that every month there is a new technology, there is advances, so we are not producing what they have now, because in 6 months' time, what they will be producing will be, totally different. And of course we need to adapt, because the Russians are working at the same speed.
I think I did not make myself clear with my question on the political volatility. I was just thinking about changing governments in Europe, political instability, or incoming leaders that might question the whole concept of cooperation amongst partners. And here, France is always mentioned as one potential example of a threat, or of kind of a government that might not be inclined to continue the various attempts to cooperate. So do you see this risk?
Yeah, it's not political instability insofar as whoever will be elected for 5 years. But it is indeed a threat to the European Union as we know it, if indeed the person elected had an anti-European program, which unfortunately is also the case in other countries. The populist and nationalist movements are all up in the rise, and unfortunately they're being helped, and sorry for coming back to that, but through the social networks on a daily basis, having this, daily propaganda as to, yes, indeed, we're talking about the FCAS that is not working very well, but we forget about Airbus and all of these other projects that are actually working well and have worked well. So I think we need to fight that, and indeed, if that happened, and I hope the French people will not vote for whoever, we all have our name in our mind, but I'm not going to pronounce it. But, I mean, what can we do? It's democracy as well. I mean, the Americans have elected Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And
they're
making do with it,
Okay.
And then it will be,
Thank you.
replaced.
Can you, sorry for being kind of impolite, but we have really just a couple of minutes left. I was allowed to go 5 minutes over time. And if you and your question would be for Chris, that would be ideal, because I did not give him, I did not give him a chance to answer. So, and could you introduce yourself? I mean, I know
sure.
you.
Julius Van Loor, media pioneer. Senator, I've got a political question, not a security question. Just over there was Gretchen Whitmer sitting. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is speaking tonight. Gavin Newsom is here. It seems like Munich is the new Iowa. Could you handicap the chances, and is it a requirement for candidates to show up at the security conference? And on a more serious note, how does this, what we're talking about right here in the rift in the transatlantic relationship, how does that influence the midterm elections?
So this is way off our core topic, but if you want to answer the question.
This is why I'm here. I mean, I'm announcing my 2028 candidacy right here. And I appreciate how many people laughed out loud at that prospect. The reality is that over the last several cycles, I've been very encouraged to see governors, senators, former cabinet officials who are likely future presidential candidates invest the time in coming to Munich, coming to Davos, going to Halifax, going to Australia, because the threat environment for all of our countries has become more serious and more real. There was a generation of American political leaders whose lives were defined by the struggle for liberty in the Second World War, in the Pacific and in Europe. And many of us who currently serve, that was our parents' generation. Part of the challenge we face politically, domestically now, is a generation that is more skeptical of American engagement in the world. We seem to have to relitigate this debate between isolationism and engagement with the world every 70 years or so. And it is being actively litigated in our political system. Let me just speak briefly to innovation and to Andrew. Absolutely, we need to be more agile, we need to be more innovative, we need to expect more burden sharing and risk sharing with industry. Look, how many companies can actually build an aircraft carrier? How many companies can actually build a nuclear-powered submarine? Much of the Cold War was defined by a huge separation between military-only companies that really thrived on making things that were unique to the military, and dual use, where dual use was a small percentage. Today, dual use has to be a vast majority. Andrew, and I got to see this in Sydney in the Ghost Shark project, we need capable long-range subsurface drones to be able to compete successfully in the Western Pacific. There is a long-standing partner program between the US Pentagon and a well-established company that followed the model you're describing. The Pentagon was paying for all the research and was paying for all the development. Anduril took the risk, and without a contract, without a commitment, went ahead and funded their own research and development, and in a few short years has deployed and is now ready to manufacture a far more capable end product, where I think the Australians have shown us, and Anduril has shown us, what is possible when you take a more risk-aligned, venture-funded approach to delivering solutions to problems. What the Ukrainian example is showing us is that under enormous pressure from Russian aggression, the Ukrainian people have iterated and iterated and iterated and invented what is the future of warfare. And so, as you said correctly, at the same time, it is an artillery battle reminiscent of 1914, where producing more 155 artillery rounds has been a key input, and it is a cutting-edge electronic warfare and drone battle at the same time in the same place. When I was here a year ago, I met with a number of American entrepreneurs, both in London and here in Munich, who were very excited about partnering with the Ukrainian defense industrial base. I think all of us need to recognize that investing in Ukraine and its defense industrial base and investing in a more agile, dual-use and innovation-driven defense industrial base across our countries is the way that we sustain the political support. The American government will spend $850 billion on defense this year. That is a breathtaking amount of money. And there is a lot of skepticism on the part of Americans that it's being well spent. I grew up in the space age on the idea that it was the pressure of the Second World War that allowed us to develop radar. That was the pressure of the Cold War that allowed us to develop the internet and GPS. The average American needs to see good jobs and innovation coming out of this massive defense investment. And if we focus only on Buy American and only on American jobs, we will lose tactically, we will lose strategically, we will lose politically. To the extent we align together, there is a strong future for all of our countries as democracies to meet this moment and to deliver the innovation that this threat environment absolutely demands.
You can also turn this around and talk about Europe. If Europe would focus only on itself, that would also not be very fruitful. So this, I think, whole panel was a plea against protectionism. It was a plea for more innovation, more cooperation, and also for working more closely with Ukraine and taking Ukraine as an example for kind of how things can be done very quickly. With that, I'm afraid we are over time already, and I need to end it here. I thank you all very much, and I ask you all to join me in a huge round of applause thanking the panel.